That's how eye-opening customer research can be. You can discover things about your prospects you had no idea they were going through. But that's great because in this case, none of the competitors were talking about this pain point. So it's now a unique messaging. It's not just a save time, save money kind of claim. It's a unique, specific pain point. And then we delivered that in an emotional way, which I also really highlight. So before I was talking about clear product positioning, it's also about what's the emotional delivery, what's the format. It could be nostalgia. Cognizant ran like a pop culture nostalgia Friends reference ad recently. We'll be there for you was the tagline. It could be nostalgia, it could be joy, it could be humor, and humor obviously comes in many forms like sarcasm, self-deprecation. The script has done a little bit of that. There's just so much available to us in how we deliver that ad.
On today's episode, I talk with Myra Ahmed, a talented LinkedIn ad copywriter and conversion copywriting consultant that injects strategic and punchy ad copy into marketing programs to help ads and landing pages convert better. As a freelance consultant, Myra has mastered the art of crafting compelling LinkedIn ads, drawing on a data-driven approach that maximizes engagement and conversion rates. In this episode, we delve into the nuances of writing creative copy for B2B ads. Myra shares examples of brands that excel in leveraging creativity in their campaigns, and she discusses her go-to sources of inspiration for keeping ad copy fresh and effective in the competitive B2B landscape. My first question that I have for you is, I want to really understand, your perspective when it comes to B2B ads. Where do you think advertisers are missing the mark? And the context here is that there's a lot of serious brands out there that want their brands to be respected. And so, of course, they have brand teams and brand guides that they have to play with. Sometimes they might be too safe. Other brands might be on the other side where they're more experimental. But I want to know, where are brands in general missing the mark within that context? That sometimes you have brands that could be a little bit more nimble, but then sometimes you have brands that have a lot of, they have a very strong brand guide and boxes that they sort of have to play within.
Yeah, I would say the overarching answer is that there is no clear process for ad creative that people are following. So there's a lot of guesswork that's going into these ads. People are just copying and pasting from the website, claims that are on the homepage. They are using ChatGPT often, even like big enterprises. And there's no real clear data-driven process with the customer in mind. I think that's really what's missing from this space. So yeah, it's a lot of assumptions that are being made. I would say a huge root cause for why we often find vague messaging, confusing, don't really get what the product does. A huge root cause behind that is unclear positioning. So the capability, I use a CAP framework, so that's CAAP. So the capability is not necessarily very clear. What's the use case? What's the category? The audience, who is this for? Can you confirm to me as a prospect that this is meant for me, a HR manager, IT manager, whoever that is? Then we have advantage, which is why choose you? Why are you better? And finally, we have problem. So what is it? What is the problem? What is the pain point that's being solved with this product? So capability, audience, advantage, problem. This is often missing from ads. So we get a lot of fluffy claims and they're not very grounded in a clear product positioning statement.
I just had a similar situation with a client that was building out some landing pages for Google, and they have one product. They're in the B2B space. They're a SaaS product in the fintech vertical. And I asked for, we have these different Google campaigns, which is bringing search traffic from different angles. And so I said, okay, there's a use case. There's use case A and there's use case B. Let's just make a landing page for each. The rest of the content's going to be the same. The product we're leading to is the same, but they're just searching it from a different angle. And so I get a rough wireframe of their landing page, and I see some of the copy, and it's extremely generic, and it completely misses the mark to the point that you're making. And so one of the things that I explained to the client was the user experience when someone's searching for a product is they have Google open or whatever, 100 tabs or whatever else they have on their screen. But they're not just clicking on your ad, they're also clicking on some of the organic listings, and they're quickly scanning that header to get a
Mm.
sense of, hey, am I in the right place? And if you're positioning yourself as the most generic version of your product, someone is going to say something interesting, whether it's I'm faster, I'm cheaper, I'm trusted by more people, and it's going to grab someone else's attention. And so, yeah, I think that's a very big challenge that I've seen with the clients I work with, that they're not thinking from the lens of how users are interacting with these platforms. Would you say in any of the testing that you've done within creative or messaging, whether it's ad copy or landing page, has there been anything that you've learned that has been sort of counterintuitive um, recently?
Yeah. Well, there was a recent experiment that I helped with, which was we tested sarcastic kind of messaging. So there was like a tone of voice. We were kind of making fun of AI actually, because we're seeing right now like so many SaaS companies are trying to promote we're AI powered and we have this feature. It's all about AI. And if you look on LinkedIn, the common response to that is like people don't really care that much. They're not as impressed as the product team is. Again, we see that mismatch between the people behind the brand and then the actual customers. So anyway, we kind of went tongue in cheek here and we made fun of the AI feature by saying you can blame the pain point on the AI feature. Like, Dory, we know you're getting the blame right now for this particular pain point, but once you use our platform, you can blame it on AI. And that didn't come from thin air, that particular insight. That actually came from Reddit threads. So that's a huge part of my process to mine through Reddit, reviews on G2 and Capterra, sales demo, customer recordings, things like that. I just take all the qualitative data and I find, okay, well, what's like a common pain point that's coming up? What's something that really gets them excited and lights them up about the product? What are the objections? This is very, very important for the messaging. So salespeople often think in this way, but I just think in marketing, we don't tend to, especially in B2B, we don't tend to talk to our customers enough and really mine through that, review all of that data, and then start creating your ads rather than just assuming you know what the ad should say. So
Yeah.
going back to that particular ad, we found in a lot of Reddit threads that people were talking about this specific pain point that the client didn't even know about. Series B, they have a sales team, didn't know about this pain point that is very, very closely related to the cybersecurity product. That's how eye-opening customer research can be. You can discover things about your prospects you had no idea they were going through. But that's great because in this case, none of the competitors were talking about this pain point. So it's now a unique messaging. You know, it's not just a save time, save money kind of claim. It's a unique, specific pain point, and then we delivered that in an emotional way, which I also really highlight. So before I was talking about clear product positioning, it's also about what's the emotional delivery, what's the format. It could be nostalgia. Cognism ran like a pop culture nostalgia Friends reference ad recently. We'll be there for you was the tagline. It could be nostalgia, it could be joy, it could be humor, and humor obviously comes in many forms like sarcasm, self-deprecation. The script has done a little bit of that. Yeah, there's just so much available to us in how we deliver that ad. Because somebody is scrolling on their phone and you are interrupting them in the middle of their scroll with your sales pitch. So can we give them a moment of like advertainment, of edutainment? So yes, still communicate what the product does, still communicate the pain point, but deliver it in a memorable way. And if you can hit those two marks of clarity and emotion, it's what I call a punchy ad. That's that's the path to creating punch, clarity and emotion.
Clarity and motion. I like that. There's some recent research that came up at Kantar Ignite conference recently in the UK, and it was really interesting because they mined the IPA database and they found a trend that humor in advertising had been on a decline for about 20 years.
Mm,
And there was a point of contention because they surveyed uh, focus groups and they saw that 90+% of audiences, I don't recall the exact number, they look for, that entertainment and creativity aspect within ads, especially when we're talking about like linear TV, because that was a channel that was, vastly uh, effective and grew, on creative ads that were entertaining people. And anyways, the contention here was that more viewers wanted to be entertained, and marketers are doing less humor in ads and are planning to do less humor in ads. And they kind of come to this point that it's sort of like a focus of brands focusing on their purpose, and also being afraid of getting backlash if they do something funny that then is like deaf tone, or just like get some sort of backlash online. And the interesting part was that when they mined the database, they saw that there was a significant lift in business effects, including profitability, loyalty, um, important metrics in ads that specifically used humor. So it's interesting to hear you call that out, because I know in B2B in particular, emotional message is something that marketers tend to kind of be like, our audience is looking for, stats and, that rational messaging. So it's great to hear you mention that. Now, there are some situations that I'm curious on your take where a brand is, like in a highly regulated industry, and they're dealing with a decision maker that they sort of have a persona built around, and it would probably be the last thing on their mind to attempt to do something around humor. What would be your pitch to a creative team that you're working with, or a brand marketer, to allow you to take some big swings um, around humor in that situation?
So I feel like one of the best ways to get buy-in is just to use data. Like you've just given us a great statistic right there about the power of data. I'm sorry, the power of humor, and how more consumers are deliberately looking for that. They want to be entertained. Um, but when it comes to enterprises, when it comes to very regulated industries where they tend to play it safe, I would say let's take a step back first and really just look at what is the positioning strategy for this advertisement campaign, because that's often where enterprises get stuck in the mud. And that's where the vague, bloated messaging comes out. Because often they have so many product capabilities that they could talk about. There's something with the sales team, the marketing team is like very all in one often. So let's just take a step back and again go back to the CAAP. So what's the capability that we want to talk about? A very specific use case, specific, not vague. Who is the audience? Again, can we segment this? The ads are great for segmenting. We can really hone down and niche down on who we're talking to. And then how are we going to communicate our advantage? And that's where enterprises have, so much that they can draw from, social proof. And finally, what is the pain point? And again, so many of these teams default to save time, save money, increase revenue, blah, blah, blah. Can we come out of the high level and just go down into the granular, and really what is a specific pain point that you are solving? And if you're still stuck, go into those Reddit threads, like search online, find where your ICP is hanging out. Or if you can go into private communities where, maybe marketing managers hang out, or whatever kind of manager, and get that data on that specific pain point. So starting off there with the clarity, the clear positioning strategy, and now we can think about what is the emotional delivery. So if we're going to talk about humor, there's so much neuroscientific research. That's often one that I like to pull from, about how messaging, communication in general, resonates when there is a humor angle, just in terms of the areas of the brain that light up. There's a higher chance of memory recall of that particular information. And that's what an ad is trying to do. It's trying to just plant a flag in that prospect's brain, where that brand now is slowly starting to occupy some space. We're trying to build that brand awareness, that brand recall, considering that 95% of your ideal buyers are not in the market for your product. And yet your ad will still probably be shown in their feeds. So they're not looking for your ad. They're not looking for your product directly, but how can you still entertain them in the meantime? How can you still remain memorable, so that when the time comes and they suddenly decide, yep, we have a need for project management tool, counting, whatever it is, that your brand now pops into mind? That's how you win this whole SaaS competition of who will be chosen, who will be listed in the consideration set. How can you make it to that list? Does your brand pop to mind? And so humor is kind of a strategy to make your mark, even if you're not the biggest brand, even if you're just a scrappy startup. Again, how can you leave an imprint in the prospect's mind?
When you're thinking about brands that are really doing it well, what are some brands that come to mind?
To be honest, not that many really that I think nail clarity and emotion, but one of the best, one that I will constantly praise is Cognizant. And they have got a really clear point of view on the market. They have a very, very clear specific advantage. So if you look through the ad library, look at Cognizant's ads and notice how competitive they are, but very tactful. So Cognizant do about 70 million annual recurring revenue, and the biggest competition is Zoom Info, around 300 million. So, you know, like the scales are very much in Zoom Info's favor. And Cognizant, the way that they communicate their competitive advantage is, hey, Zoom Info is great for North American data on these prospects you're trying to target, decision makers. We are great for Europe. So if you're trying to target European market, come to us. Like, our data is more accurate, is GDPR compliant. These are advantages that Zoom Info doesn't have, nor does Apollo, their other big competitor. And they communicate that in very, very creative ways. So sometimes they use the words of a prospect and they'll have like a LinkedIn screenshot that somebody has said about them, completely organic, authentic social proof that they've now mocked up in their ads. So it's like an influencer recommendation. There's another one where they're like, we're like Zoom Info, but with a British accent because they hail from the UK. And then they have one where it's like zoom over to Cognizant. So there's times when they're quite witty and they use wordplay. There's times when they use social proof. There's times when they just focus directly on the features and the capabilities that they have and how it's better. So they really experiment a lot and they test a lot of different angles just on competitive ads alone. And I think that really speaks to knowing what your clear advantage is over the default, the big market leader, especially again, if you're a startup. And that's why I keep bringing up the clear positioning, the cap. Like, what is a specific capability that you can focus on? Who is your audience? What is your advantage? The more specificity that you have when you answer these questions, the higher the chance is that your ad will land with prospects, get their attention, help them understand what your product does, and leave that imprint, leave that memorability. Maybe have them click onto the landing page. Maybe not today. Maybe they won't sign up for a demo today. But when that day comes that they do enter the market and decide that they are willing to research into your product, you can help come to mind. So yeah, Cognizant is great for creativity, but still grounded in clarity.
It's great. There's a brand I think of, it's called Mountain. They're a CTV performance media platform. I think Ryan Reynolds is one of the owners. So he shows up in some of the ads. And it's funny because literally it's funny because the other day I see an ad on my LinkedIn come up and it was just like, it was saying some like, if you know, kind of like statement, but then it goes on to say like, if you know, or if you don't, maybe you don't, and it just keeps playing on this concept. And I'm just like, it popped out because obviously that acronym is like, somewhat culturally relevant. And to see a B2B advertiser use it, it just kind of like, it was unexpected. So it grabbed my attention because I was like, oh, I didn't expect this brand to be talking to me like this. And yeah, it grabbed my attention. So it was effective in that sense. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to go sign up for the service. That's a whole different part of the journey, but it popped out and enough that it was memorable for me to even bring up in this conversation. So I definitely do think there's something there. LinkedIn's B2B Institute, has pushed out a lot of research around the effectiveness of B2B, humor in B2B, and just emotional language in general. So hopefully more brands are taking that into account. Now on the flip side, is there we don't have to call out a specific brand, but is there something that most B2B brands that you work with and partner with, is there something that when you look at their ads in general, most of them, outside of the positioning, because that's something obviously you can very easily call out, is there anything else that you commonly see as like, top three things that you sort of have to workshop through with clients?
Oh, yeah. So like the biggest one that comes to mind is outcome focused messaging. So that's the increased revenue, the save productivity. these ads, these B2B ads will often lead with that huge high level outcome, that huge high level benefit. And I understand why this has happened, because we talk a lot about, hey, you need to sell on your benefits, that's why people buy. But there's a point where the benefit has now gone into the clouds and it's not even grounded in reality anymore. So if you are selling, project management app, and then to talk about increasing revenue, like Calendly is an example of a brand that talks a lot about revenue. They have a huge enterprise audience, and it's like so many degrees apart from what the actual product does. So there is an obsession, I suppose, with trying to convince the CEO that this is a trustworthy product, and trying to get buy-in, build a good business case by speaking about revenue and productivity and all these big business outcomes. So whilst there's a rationale to it, that does not resonate generally with prospects. They just want to know, what does the product do? Is this for somebody like me? Can you give them those little light bulb confirmation moments? And that's definitely something I have to work through with clients to help them understand it from the prospect's point of view. There's just constantly this gap that we have to bridge between your expert knowledge on your product and then what the customer really cares about, how to communicate that to the customer. But we sometimes lose that perspective. So that comes to mind. Similarly, like statistics in advertisements. Now, I'm not like blasting them. I'm not saying that they're completely useless, but it's more about how grounded is that statistic in what your product actually does. Again, if it's focusing on increasing revenue and reducing turnover and blah blah blah, it doesn't communicate how it works to your prospect. They're just looking at a big number, and at this point early on in their journey, they just need to know what it is that you do. So whilst you can still use statistics, use that to support what the capability is. And then lastly, I would just say there's not really like an experimentation friendly culture in B2B generally. So the in-house team aren't, there's some fear there. There's a little bit of anxiety about taking creative risks with the ads, because what if that suddenly doesn't perform well, then that will reflect poorly on you. So that's why the status quo methods are so popular, and they're reinforced constantly by this lack of experimentation culture. And that's why we see the brand emotions aren't often very, very clear in ads. Like we were saying earlier, emotions aren't really focused on in B2B. Just the branding itself, like colors aren't always very distinct throughout each advertisement. And having a personality, this is something I'm so big on, like having just some kind of human like charm. I think if anything, with the rise of ChatGPT, we're seeing more of like we're heading towards more robotic copy that just loses that sense of humanity and authenticity. But yeah, I really advocate for adding more personality. And again, like that's where humor comes in, empathy, whatever it is, whatever the emotion is that we decide to use. But I would really love to see more of that in B2B coming out in the voice and not just the visuals. Sometimes the visuals are very like modern and colorful, and then the tone of voice is very plain and official B2B and increase revenue and supercharge your potential, blah blah blah. I would love to see more of the human, casual, conversational tone of voice in the copy itself.
Yeah. I would love to see definitely, I don't know. And marketers do this all the time. Everybody figures out something that works and then they indoctrinate it into a playbook, and it's like, well, this is how we do thought leadership, and you know, we make white papers, and it's like there's probably still a place for these things, but these tactics are just not as effective as they once were. When there was only a few companies with a lot of insight and in topics that were lacking in content on the internet in general, white papers were very effective. When no one was doing webinars and a few companies started to do webinars to go really deep into the process or the methodology of something, that was very effective. But now when all these companies are just creating content, it just creates noise. And so I think we're going through this kind of like weird shift where we are now training ourselves how to identify noise, and there's signals that we look at. For example, if you look at Gartner's, they have a breakdown of they surveyed like decision makers at B2B companies, and they basically have a breakdown of what type of tactics are more likely to influence them. So for example, first party thought leadership, which is probably like 2% of the actual thought leadership out there. So when you have the CEO, of T-Mobile or some sort of big company saying something publicly, that it doesn't come off like a press release, obviously, people pay attention to that. When you have third party research, like, a company that partners with Gartner or Forrester or some sort of independent, trusted, verifiable industry voice, that also gets a lot of attention as well. Um, but most of the other tactics sort of start to dwindle as more and more people do it. And so that obviously impacts any kind of performance that you can have with ads or a landing page, because at the end of the day, if you're not in market to buy, which most people aren't, the content that is going to grab your attention is that value driven, educational, thought leadership sort of content. Is that something that you tend to like wrestle with as well, um, in your process, or are you someone just, you're just, are you usually working in that silo of, okay, this is the thing I'm going to make the best of?
So I do review the competitors in the ad library to see what kind of ads are running. Like in cybersecurity, we see a lot of research reports. We see a lot of, I would call them scare tactics of, you might get hacked, and here's some statistics about how many companies were hacked last year. This might happen to you. And I see what the status quo methods are for trying to run ads. Oh, white papers is another one that's huge in cyber as well. And then I try to find the gaps, the opportunities that they're not taking. Again, this is where having an experimentation friendly culture comes in, when you allow your marketers to have these bright ideas to do something different. And yeah, so when you know that a certain tactic has been just like, it's been bombarded, it's overwhelmed in your particular vertical in your space, I would I would really encourage you to find something that another space is doing that nobody in your space is doing. Like, look for inspiration, look outside of your industry, and also look outside of B2B. I always encourage people to do that. One of my favorite places for advertainment inspiration is TikTok, which sounds crazy because you'd think that's so many miles apart from B2B, but they know how to create a good hook. They know how to make people want to watch until the last second of the video. And I'm not just talking about the native content creators, I'm talking about the brands out there. They know that there are very, very high standards to run advertisements. Otherwise, people will skip. They skip anyway on TikTok. So it's very, very ruthless. It's a very, very ruthless world on TikTok. So you really have to know what that hook should be. And the way that they deliver this, like the camera angles that they use, and like point of view, you're doing blah, 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 some kind of like meme, these kind of things that stand out in the feed, that hooks people. So I don't think we should have such like tight silos between the world of B2B and B2C, because when you're not in LinkedIn, you might be on a B2C app, like you might be on Facebook, you might be on Instagram, whatever it is. So we are constantly navigating between these two worlds. So we don't really need to keep those walls between them. What hooks you on Instagram will probably also hook you on LinkedIn. So yeah, I really encourage people to look in the B2C world as well. And then yeah, just open yourself up to creativity, like a different angle of delivering your message, but still just ask yourself, is this actually relevant for a prospect? Because with these webinars, it's something where I see like the ego of the brand coming out. They just want to show off something about the brand, this incredible research, whatever it is. But is your prospect actually going to get value from the webinar, from the white paper, whatever it is that you're offering? Is this relevant to their
Yeah.
job, and is it also relevant to what your capabilities are? And I often think that people don't question that enough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. Uh, Final question. Any hot predictions for B2B ad creative in 2025? Can we expect more of the same or anything different?
I think that slowly, the market is heading towards clearer messaging. I think there's more education on this. B2B teams are learning to slowly like drift away from the outcome kind of messaging, the business outcome. And yeah, we're going to see more clarity, I think, in the positioning. People are going to be more willing to niche down in terms of segments and personas that they target. I also see a strong point of view that you were bringing up, thought leadership. I see that really increasing with every year in B2B. And I think next year it's going to be almost like a non-negotiable for a B2B brand to have a strong point of view, ideally for your founder or somebody on your team to get involved and be the face of your brand, communicating all of this. I think in 2024 we saw so many more founders on LinkedIn and being the thought leader for the brand. That will probably continue. Nobody wants to get left behind, so I think even FOMO will strike. And yeah, finally, I think more advertainment as well. Like I think people are realizing the value of actually entertaining your prospects when you're trying to sell to them. If nothing else will reinforce that point for you, then just looking at the results of your salesy ads will make that clear that, okay, this is not working. What could we do instead? And that value-driven content, it will just very clearly tie to the metrics that you want to hit. And I think people will be more open to actually taking more creative angles. And the more, like, again, scrappy startups have such an advantage here because there's less bureaucracy for them to deal with, smaller committees, boards that they have to show. Okay, here's the copy. Are we allowed to put this out in the world? There's not so many. There are not as many cooks in the kitchen. So, I think, yeah, creativity will have its place next year.
I agree with you. I think the founder-led sort of content thought leadership train, I think I've seen a ton of it. There's the former co-founder of Chubby's, or not former, but the co-founder of Chubby's. His name's Preston Rutherford. He comes up on my feed almost every day, and he has a very interesting way of kind of doing his thought leadership. It's like always a conversation. It's like CMO, and then something, and then like head of finance, and then like performance marketer. So it's a very clever way to do it. There's a lot of other people. Also, the founder of Stan also does a phenomenal job on I've seen him on LinkedIn, sort of building in public, and also on YouTube. So I agree. There's probably more juice there to be squeezed out. In any regard, where can our listeners follow and connect with you, Myra?
Yeah, the best place is on LinkedIn. I'm always there. So that's just LinkedIn/in/Myra Ahmed. And please connect with me. Feel free to drop me a message to say you listened to this podcast, maybe any thoughts that you had that came up whilst you were listening or any questions. And yeah, just find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Myra, thank you for your time and your thoughts today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so, so much.